Today is all about surrogacy because you know what? Kim K had one, so you know I had to talk about it. And Khole and Tristan are considering it before they kind of backed off. But hey, true needs a sibling. You gotta do what you gotta do. Anyway, buckle up and take the deep dive into surrogacy with us on #Lawyered. Hey y'all, welcome back to #Lawyered. You have Austin and myself in studio, and we are talking all about surrogacy, another topic that Austin is very not knowledgeable in until today.
It's like Matt and I said, we're both going to be learning,
Yes.
Live in person, except I guess I get to do it on the air. So
You do. So this always provides me entertainment when I bring a female-specific issue that you are learning about.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, then you're going to be doing most of the talking today, which is fine.
Okay, that's fine.
Tell us a little bit, what is surrogacy?
Surrogacy. Okay, so let's just go straight up with the Merriam-Webster definition of surrogacy, which is the practice by which a woman called a surrogate mother becomes pregnant and gives birth to a baby in order to give it to someone who cannot have children, is the literal definition in Merriam-Webster.
Okay.
So it's a pretty broad definition.
Yeah, pretty broad.
Okay.
And I know just looking through the outline and everything, we've got it broken down a little bit. Obviously, there's going to be impacts here legally with everything that touches on this, whether you're talking about parental rights or rights that have to do with woman's body, all that kind of stuff. So
absolutely.
A lot of areas here.
And a lot of areas. And then you also have to consider the whole concept of egg donors, and then are the laws in Texas that allow you to create agreements governing these sorts of things. Are they inherently sexist? Do they favor straight couples? Do they not? There's a lot of perspectives to be taken here. And surrogacy, it's wild, right? Because this technology is still fairly new, right? But,
right.
As in, it hasn't been around for like hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So anyway, so let's break it down. But before we really do a deep dive into surrogacy, I think that we need to do some basic terms. I love flashcards. Unfortunately, these are not flashcards. But anyway, Austin, first term that we need to know. Go.
So the intended parent, it's the person who cannot carry a baby to term, hires a surrogate instead. So it's their egg or sperm that may be part of the transferred embryo. Could be single, could be married, but it's the person that cannot have the kids that is intending to want the children.
Absolutely. And so this could be a man, this could be a woman. So fine there. Our second term is surrogate. Okay, we just got that definition, but as a reminder, this is the woman who's carrying the baby to term from the intended parent or parents. Yeah. And so typically she's between the age of 21, 35, has already had children, so successful pregnancy or pregnancies. And then oftentimes we also hear surrogates referred to as gestational carriers.
Okay.
And then you have
the egg or sperm donor, where the intended person, when the intended parent cannot create an embryo on their own, this is the person who they use
gametes.
Their sperm or egg. Is that what a gamete is? Gamete
is the reproductive material. So yeah, it's like the sperm of the egg.
Gotcha. And this is, they provide that.
I take that back. Gamete is, I'm pretty sure, sperm, not like sperm or egg.
Gotcha.
Science was not my forte in college, y'all. I literally took a spring term class about endangered plants so I could hike outside in the Appalachian Mountains.
It's not a bad choice.
It was great.
Yeah,
I loved it.
So basically the donor is the person providing the material needed to make the child.
Yeah, the genetic material.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this could be from someone that the intended parent knows, or they could get an anonymous donation through a gamete bank or a fertility clinic. Right? So there's a lot of options here. And then you have in vitro fertilization. I think a lot of us have heard of IVF. And so just quickly to break it down, it's generically the medical process used to fertilize an egg outside a woman's uterus. And so in surrogacy in particular, a fertility specialist will collect the eggs and the sperms from the intended parents or from a donor, right? Usually you see this in same-sex couples a lot. And then the egg is fertilized in a test tube or a culture dish, and then it's implanted into the surrogate's uterus. So very straightforward. And then we have the surrogacy agency.
And this sounds like a little bit of an adoption agency.
It kind of is. It has shades of adoption agency.
Right.
So
because you're matching intended parents and donors and surrogates and all those kinds of things.
Absolutely. And then the last thing is the fertility clinic, right? And so straightforward, this is the medical organization that is completing the IVF process and is going to be working closely with the fertility clinic to make sure that the surrogacy is completed, hopefully successfully. All right. So we have seen, at least I have seen, you don't watch Kardashians, I do. I won't give you too much cred. Anyway, so clearly the Kardashians are all about surrogacy. You know, Kim's babies 3 and 4 were carried to term by surrogate because if Kim had further babies, she was already at risk for preeclampsia and then another concerning condition for when she had her first 2 children. So it was a danger to her health, whether people believe it or not. I believe it. I don't think she would lie, but that's just me. And so anyway, so she had a surrogate for babies 3 and 4, and then Khole and Tristan had their first baby naturally, and now they've been talking about having a second baby, but Khole has been looking the surrogacy route, and she mentioned that back in like March or May of this year, but now she's kind of quieted down, and she's kind of sort of rethinking this now. So anyway, a lot of celebrities, this is something that, you know, they'll do.
Yeah, and I assume it's an expensive process, which is why there's bigger access for celebrities who may have more means to be able to accomplish that.
Yes, it's extremely expensive. It's not typically covered by healthcare. So just like infant adoption, right? It's not going to be covered by healthcare. And speaking of infant adoption, there's a lot of shades of infant adoption that are similar to what we're talking about with surrogacy law, especially the termination of the parental rights of the traditional surrogate, which we'll get into there. So if anyone's interested in the adoption, infant adoption in particular, they should listen to our episode with Jess.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, okay, anyway, so basically it's not just Kardashians in California, right? Surrogacy is legal here in Texas.
Yep.
And so, like I had kind of sort of hinted at earlier, you have 2 different types of surrogacy in Texas, right? So you have a traditional surrogacy and you have a gestational surrogacy. And so there's a difference, right? Okay. So that difference is that a traditional surrogate utilizes her own egg for the pregnancy. Sorry, buddy, you can't be a surrogate. I know, I'm crushing your dreams.
Oh, no.
I know, you're so sad. And then in a traditional surrogacy, at that point, the surrogate is the biological mother of the baby. As opposed to a gestational surrogate, she does not use her own egg for the pregnancy and has no biological relationship with baby.
You're saying the surrogate has no biological relationship?
Correct.
Okay. It's because it's the intended parents or someone else's, I guess.
Or the donors. Yeah. So, for example, I had one of my favorite teachers in high school. She and her husband later on had to go the surrogacy route. She was a former CIA and FBI agent. She was part of counterintelligence in the Middle East right after 9/11 happened. And so she went through a lot, including, I think she took shrapnel to the back at one point when there was a bombing. And so anyway, long story short, because of some of the things that she went through, she and her husband had to have a surrogate because she couldn't carry a baby to term. And so she used her genetic, her eggs, and it was her husband's genetic material. And so the surrogate in that sense was just a gestational surrogate. She was just, the oven bacon, the bun, if you will. And the bun was provided.
I was wondering if this analogy was going to come up. Cause...
it always comes up.
Yeah.
I can't, I don't know. I'm so tired. I can't think of like a better analogy.
It works.
It's a little overused, but it works. So that, in that sense, like that's a very traditional sense that you see surrogacy is when someone, due to a health condition, they and their husband can't have the baby like in the natural traditional way.
Sure.
You also see surrogacy with couples, like same-sex couples who want children, but of course they can only provide half of the genetic material necessary. Right. And so in that case, typically you're going to have, it's better to have a gestational surrogate and then to obtain the egg, from like a donor bank. Or, I mean, if you have a donor, they can provide an egg. But typically, you find someone who is going to be purchasing an egg from a donation bank, if you will.
Okay.
And I use the term donation bank. I don't know if that's like clinically the right term, but I mean,
I think it's
you can,
point
like,
across,
as a young woman, you can actually sell your eggs. There's like a huge market for it. Yeah, it's wild. And there's a lot of legal questions there about
absolutely.
selling eggs. But we'll get into that another day. Okay, so now that we know the difference between traditional and gestational surrogate, how does surrogacy work in Texas? Dun, dun, dun. I know you know all about this,
I was going to say,
Austin.
you're going to have to tell us about this.
No color commentary today?
No, we'll wait. I'll figure out something to talk about.
Okay, well, I'm sure I'll give you plenty to talk about. All right, so in Texas, the Lone Star State, God bless Texas, we don't have a statutory authorization of traditional surrogacy arrangements. So your traditional surrogacy arrangement is going to be handled very similar to a parental termination and adoption, in that at the birth of the child, the genetic father, surrogate's husband, if she's married, all have to execute an affidavit acknowledging paternity, which is very important. And then at that point, the child's birth certificate is then issued when the child is born, initially with the name of the genetic father and the surrogate. And then, much like an infant adoption in Texas, you have to wait a 48-hour period. Although now, Jess, I don't mean to embarrass you, but now I can't remember if it's 48-hour window or longer for infant adoption. I think it might be longer.
It was longer.
It was much longer, actually.
Yeah,
it was much.
Because they were talking about the longer waiting period, the stress that goes on during that time.
That's right. Yeah. It was several days. Now that I recall.
Yeah.
Okay. So similar, but not as excruciating as infant adoption, you still have to wait 48 hours after the birth of the child, and then the surrogate, and then again her husband, if she's married, execute affidavits relinquishing parental rights, so that the genetic father and his wife can then file for a termination and adoption of the infant. So a termination of parental rights and then adopting the infant.
So I mean, mechanically, even though there's some specific differences, but mechanically it works the same as
it's very similar.
Because that's how
in
normally
this setting.
Right, in this setting, because you would have a termination and adoption that actually kind of occur not contemporaneously, but they're kind of it's one right after the other in the same court proceeding. So it makes a lot of sense that it's handled that way because the situation is very similar.
But so here's the thing, though, right? So kind of like an adoption, you have that the surrogate has that window to change her mind, and the surrogate she can change her mind after she gets pregnant. And then if she has the baby, I mean, to my understanding, she can even change her mind in that 48-hour window, which, how awful. Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of like what Jess was talking about on the adoption show about the process of waiting, going through all the steps to get there, because you're going to have to do a lot to get to this point.
Absolutely.
Here as well.
You have to do so much, and then especially if it's, you're using, for example, your own egg, right? You have to go through the egg retrieval, and when I say you're using your own egg, the genetic mother is using her own egg to use with donor sperm or maybe her husband's sperm in order to create the embryo to implant into the surrogate. And how awful at that point, if you don't have some sort of agreement to prevent this from happening, all of a sudden the surrogate could be at the birth of the baby, oh, I feel like the baby's mine because I carried it, so I'm not going to give it to you. I'm not going to terminate rights.
Yeah.
And there's really nothing legally you can do because there's a presumption in Texas, right?
Right.
That if the baby is born, it is the carrier's baby.
Right. And the court's not going to take away a biological mother's child from her if she's changing her mind within this period.
But here's the thing though, Austin, is the surrogate the biological mother? She's not, because it's not her egg.
Okay, so we're talking about traditional, right?
Well, in this situation, I'm saying that this is like a gestational.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was thinking traditional.
No, gotcha. This is gestational.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, that does make it strange,
right? And so I think there's a question here. There's a question of law here. I think it can be challenged, right? And so, because, correct me if I'm wrong, is that when a woman has a baby, it is presumed hers.
It is.
Yeah.
Just like if a woman has a baby and she's married, the father's noted as the presumed father too.
So in this situation, can you imagine? You have the genetic parents, and then you have the surrogate and her husband, and then they're the presumed parents of the baby who's genetically not theirs.
Yeah.
Complete nightmare.
Sounds like a Hallmark movie with a lot of drama. Maybe Lifetime. I don't know which one it is.
I don't really watch those shows, but they're like before my time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But maybe. So, okay. Anyway, and then also there's, of course, like traditionally, if the traditional surrogate uses her own egg, then it's still a nightmare, but I think it's easier to understand why she's like, actually, I am going to keep it because it's half me.
Sure. Yeah.
But in Texas, we love contracts.
We do.
We love contracts in Texas so much. So you can get a contract to prevent this from happening. And you should, if you ever go the surrogacy route, always get a contract. I'm sure the Kardashians did.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they did. And it makes sense to have this, especially in the gestational situation, because it's not the surrogate's own egg that's being used.
Correct.
It makes a lot more sense that this would be enforceable in that scenario.
So actually, interestingly enough, in Texas, it is, let me back this up. In Texas, you can have what's called a validated gestational agreement. And am I saying that correctly? Gestational?
I'm gonna go off of whatever you think that the pronunciation is supposed to be. You're gonna know more about this than me.
I appreciate the confidence. Well, I'll just, sound confident then.
Sure.
Okay, great. Anyway, so you can have a validated gestational agreement validated by the court to avoid this. Maybe the surrogate changes her mind during the pregnancy or in the 48-hour window after the baby's born and decides to keep it. You can basically create a contract to prevent that from happening. Now, the kicker here, though, is that is only applicable to a gestational pregnancy. And so in a surrogacy under a validated gestational agreement, you cannot have a traditional surrogate. It is just not permissible.
Okay, makes sense. Again, drawing the line there because of whose genetic material is being used to create the child.
Exactly. So anyway, so you have to get the validated gestational agreement. So I think we all understand now that you want one if you're going to go the surrogacy route, right? It's pretty obvious. So,
and this is actually in the family code, section 160.754, that actually statutorily authorizes these types of agreements.
Yeah, and so I don't know when that part of the code was enacted, but I'm actually very glad that is enacted because I think it's preventing a lot of nightmares for a lot of parents.
Oh yeah. Makes things a little bit more clear for everybody that's participating in the process.
Absolutely. So one of the benefits, right, of getting this validated gestational agreement is that the surrogate cannot change her mind and be like, oh, actually, JK, y'all, I'm going to keep the baby, even though it's not genetically mine. Like, she can't do that. That's illegal.
Right.
In fact, like, the court can force her to hand the baby over.
And that's interesting to me because it just seems like that the courts typically are thinking, okay, best interest of the child, best interest of the child. But here, we're going to adhere to the terms of this contract, which I'm okay with. I'm just saying it's unique compared to how the family code typically works.
It is really unique. And so this is the only area of, I think, family law where it's not best interest of child at this point.
Right.
It's the embryo and then the baby, right, when it's born 48 hours later, and this is going to sound really controversial, it's the subject of a contract. So it's not quite treated like property, but it's not treated like a child as you would treat a child under Texas law in terms of applying best interest of child.
Right.
And so that's kind of wild to me that there's this strange middle ground and this strange status that a child created through surrogacy occupies in Texas law.
Yeah.
And so I think there has been some case law on this, and I think there's going to be more case law as this becomes more common and more affordable and another option to more and more parents.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think it's really interesting, and there's moral implications too, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like, what are some of the moral implications you're thinking of in this situation?
Well, I mean, it's stuff that you can wrap in with abortion and all other types of stuff where you're talking about the actual creation of life inside a human, and whether that cuts against your religious beliefs or especially during that 48-hour period, what if the surrogate then all of a sudden feels convicted now that she's actually had the child? I mean, yeah, there's just a lot that can get wrapped up into that.
Yeah, it's wild, really wild. So, but going back to section 160.754 of the Family Code, there's a lot of elements that you need to hit in order to have a gestational agreement that can even be viable to be validated by the court.
Okay.
Because it's a two-pronged step. You have to meet these elements in basically your contract, and then you have to petition the court to get it validated. If you don't get it validated, you basically don't have a gestational agreement, which is wild again, right? So you have to take this extra step. Normally in Texas, you just sign a contract, you're good. There's not a lot of exceptions. You can contract your life. Well, you can't contract your life away, but you can contract a lot away.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense that this extra steps here because this is such a unique area of comparing or at least treating this unborn child like property. I mean, there's got to be. It makes sense. There's an extra step.
It's like they're treated. It's like somewhere in between property and a child.
Sure.
And so that's wild, right? Because if you're treating an embryo, and then even until 48 hours after the baby's born, like property, well, then what implications does that have for other areas of the law?
Yeah.
Like, what implication does that have, in abortion laws?
Right.
I mean, we just had the heartbeat bill pass in Texas recently, where it passed, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, that's a huge thing.
Yeah. When we have the Mississippi Supreme Court case, it's going to be heard in October.
Which I'm very excited about.
Yeah. Because the whole idea about that, I mean, it's all about viability. What's the definition of viability? Should it be expanded? And that plays squarely into what we're talking about here about how they're classifying this unborn child.
And to be clear, viability of the fetus.
Viability of the fetus, right.
Okay. So I'm going to rein us back in. So again, looking at the code, so this gestational agreement needs to identify the intended parents, the gestational surrogate, and her husband, if she's married, which that is interesting, and I'll circle back around to that. And then any donors used in the procedure. So, for example, if you have Kendall and Joe, and Joe is just, his swimmers aren't working. It's just no go. Sorry, buddy. But Kendall's fine. So Kendall is going to be using her own egg. Joe, sorry, buddy. They're just not moving. And so she gets, say, a sperm donor, and then they do the IVF process, implant into the surrogate. So at that point, they would need to get the donors signing off, if you will.
So basically all the participants. All the participants. Yep.
All right, so the prospective gestational surrogate's agreement to the pregnancy obviously has to be in this agreement. Like, she has to agree, right? So if you have Kelly is the surrogate. Kelly has to agree to be the surrogate for Kendall and Joe. And then the prospective surrogate, right? So in our hypothetical, it's Kelly. Say Kelly is married to Sam. Kelly and Sam, right, because he's the husband of the surrogate, also have to sign off in addition to all of the donors. So the donors of genetic material, right? So whoever donated the sperm. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense that the husband of the surrogate has to sign off because of the fact that the way families are defined in Texas, if you're married, technically at that point, the husband would have rights and duties as a father.
There's a legal presumption, right, under the family code that if a child is born to a married couple, that the woman's husband is the father of the child.
The presumed father, and therefore at that point, he has rights, duties, obligations, all those kinds of things, unless that is terminated. And so if you're going to do that, that's why you have to get him to sign off on the gestational agreement as well.
Absolutely. And so they're signing off on relinquishing all parental rights and duties. Yeah. Okay. So you also have to have an agreement between the gestational surrogate and the intended parents to exchange health information about not only the gestational surrogate, which obviously you would need that,
right?
But you also need each intended parent's health information exchanged as well. Okay. And that's going to be throughout the entire period covered by this agreement. And then, this is interesting. if there is more than one intended parent, they have to be married to each other.
Got it. Okay.
Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
So
okay.
you can't have just, a committed life partner who does not fall into the definition of common law marriage.
Okay.
Like, you have to actually be married.
Or you could have just a single parent if there's not, and just a single intended parent without a second intended parent. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they can
if you're a strong, independent, working woman, and you just never got around to finding a man, but you want a baby, that's fine.
Okay,
you're not married.
You can still have one.
You can still have one, or God forbid, your husband tragically dies in a car wreck because some idiot was drunk driving. Never drink and drive. Then at that point, she's a widow, and if she wants to have a baby, she can go ahead and do that because she's not married.
You can't have two intended parents unless they're married.
Correct.
Got it. Which
is interesting to me. And so both intended parents must be a party to the gestational agreement. Obvious. Mm-hmm. Great. So the eggs that are going to be transferred into the gestational surrogate has to be from either an intended parent or a donor. So here, for example, if you have a gay couple, they can still do this, but they'll just have to obtain the egg from a donor.
Sure.
And then the agreement must also state that the physician performing the assisted reproduction procedure has informed the parties to the agreement of a whole lot of things. There's a list.
Yeah.
It's wild. So, for example, the physician has to describe or tell the parties the rate of successful conceptions and births attributable to the procedure. And then as well, they need to tell the parties the most recently published outcome statistics for the facility where the procedure will be performed, the potential for risks associated with the implantation of multiple embryos. Usually you implant multiple embryos because not all of them will take.
Sure.
And then the nature and expenses, cha-ching, associated with the procedure, and the health risks associated with fertility drugs, egg retrieval, and egg embryo transfers, because, it looks miserable, doing egg retrieval. It sounds very painful. And then also the reasonably foreseeable psychological effects resulting from the procedure, which I can imagine that is a psychological journey.
Oh, I'm sure for everybody involved, but it's especially the surrogate, I would think, as well.
100%. Okay, and so I say all of that, right? We spend so much time talking about what has to be in this agreement, what elements you need. There's a whole lot of elements you need, and you want to make sure you hit every single one. So obviously, if you're going to do this, you need an attorney to draft this up, an attorney preferably who knows what they're doing. This is very critical. However, it's also critical that there's one thing you do not include.
What's that?
A gestational agreement cannot limit the right of the gestational surrogate to make decisions that safeguard her health or the health of an embryo.
And that makes sense. She's the one carrying the embryo, and it's her health, her body, and all those sorts of things.
So it's pretty wild, right? God forbid you go through all of this, and then there's some sort of complication, and she's in a situation where she can try to continue with the baby, or she's going to die, and then you have to pick, okay, well, just because she's a surrogate doesn't mean that she has to run the high risk of dying to carry the baby to term. She can save her life.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So now that we know what components we need in a gestational agreement, you need to go and get that magic validation from the court, which is a whole other process. Okay.
Yeah, and I've never heard of this before.
Yeah, it's wild. It's a long process.
Yeah.
So you have to actually petition the court to validate the agreement that all the parties have entered into, right? So the gestational surrogate, not traditional. Gestational surrogate, the gestational surrogate's husband, if she's married, all of the donors, as well as all of the intended parents. And so they all have to be in this, and this agreement has to get validated by the court, and it has to be done before the gestational surrogate becomes pregnant.
Policy-wise, that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
But that just means you got to do a lot of pre-planning for this to keep going.
This is a long journey. It takes a lot of legal expertise.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money, takes a huge emotional toll, I think. especially on the intended parents as well as the surrogate. And so this petition is going to be filed in the county of the gestational surrogate or the intended parents, as long as they've lived in that county for 90 days, right? So Kendall and Joe have lived in Dallas County for 120 days. They can file in Dallas County. And then once the baby is born, the intended parents must file a birth notice with the court. So at that point, the court can then find that the intended parents are the parents and order the Bureau of Vital Statistics to issue a new birth certificate naming the intended parents as the baby's parents. And then, and this goes back to that weird status of not property but not given the same status as child under the family code traditionally is. If necessary, the court may also order the gestational surrogate to give the child to the intended parents if she hasn't already done so.
So this agreement, once validated, it gives the court the authority to make these orders.
The court can enforce this contract.
Yeah. And you know what? That makes sense. You've gone through, I mean, they have all these checkpoints in here. It makes sense for them to enforce it that way.
It does. But I can imagine that there is a lot of it. There's room for a lot of emotional tolls, maybe psychological tolls. And I'm sure it has to be hard if, God forbid, there's a situation where the surrogate just is like, I can't give up this baby. And you're like, well, it's not yours.
Yeah. I mean, it sets it up for what could be an intense situation. It makes sense why we have a lot of these procedures in place that take place long before the pregnancy even occurs.
And it's important, right? Because you want as many safeguards in place to protect the intended parents. And ultimately, I see with all these safeguards, it's my opinion that the Texas legislature is trying to protect the baby.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so.
So, but again, it's the way they go about it is this weird quasi-property, quasi-child status, which is, frankly, I think very controversial. But I don't know how else you do it.
Yeah, and I think that it'll become more controversial, as you said, when more cases come about and we actually start maybe seeing some fights about this in court, as opposed to just talking about hypotheticals.
So I will be interested to see how this eventually turns out. I do hope this becomes a much more affordable thing that intended parents, a much broader range of intended parents are able to avail themselves of. Because if you want a family and you're qualified and able to provide a happy, loving home for a child, I think you should be able to.
Yeah.
So, all right. Austin, do you have any final thoughts, questions, words of wisdom, commentary on how much you learned today?
I think I'll leave that to you.
You'll leave that to me. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you learned a lot today.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive into surrogacy with us. And stay tuned for closing arguments. And Austin and I will see you next time.
Guys, thanks for listening. Closing arguments are coming up, but make sure before you go rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast anywhere that you listen to your podcast. Check us out on YouTube, and you can check us out on Instagram and talk to us. Tell us what you want to hear about. You can search us at #lawyered, spelled out. You can talk to Andrea at andrea.s.turner, and you can talk to me at The Dallas Lawyer. See y'all again soon.
Hey y'all, you know I love a Kardashian Jenner moment. So, guess who got a surprise visitor at her house? That's right, supermodel Kendall Jenner's security guards intercepted an unwelcome visitor, and when they turned him away, this unwelcome visitor bolted for the fence and tried to hop the fence into Kendall Jenner's property. In doing so, he cut his hand and was arrested and booked for misdemeanor trespassing. Guys, don't trespass. Even trying to vault the fence could land you in some serious legal trouble, especially if it's a Kardashian Jenner home. So, be careful.